I'd like to introduce our host and psychotherapist for their series, I Am Not Okay, Kim Christing. Kim is the founder and executive director of Bay Ridge Counseling Centers and Human Strong, which is part of the Bay Ridge Circle of Care. He is an author and creator of several mental health programs in the area of mood disorder and anger management. For several years, Kim hosted a call-in national talk show called Nightlight and has appeared on numerous national talk shows speaking to the issues of mental health and relationships. Over his 40-year career, Kim has intimately worked with thousands of individuals, couples, and families to help navigate the challenges of mental, emotional, and relational health. Please welcome Kim Christing.
Thank you so much, Amy. Today, I am so delighted to welcome Kevin Garrett. Kevin and his wife, Julia, met at the University of Toronto and first went to China in 1984 as English teachers for 1 year. Over the next 30 years, they lived in 7 different Chinese cities and worked in various capacities, including teaching English, starting consulting companies, a training center, translation company, and a family center. They also operated an orphanage, founded a bilingual kindergarten, and worked with both house and government churches. In 2007, they moved to the Chinese border city of Dandong on the China-North Korea border and started Peter's Coffee House. On August 4th, 2014, they were arrested by the Chinese Ministry of State Security, or the FBI of China, and charged with spying and espionage. They spent the next 6 months in isolation being interrogated by 3 investigators up to 6 hours a day. Then Kevin spent the next 19 plus months in a prison with 900 other inmates, while his wife Julia was placed in quasi-house arrest pending trial. They were detained over 175 days in China. Kevin, after being pronounced guilty of spying and espionage, was deported on September 15th, 2016. Their dramatic story is documented in their memoir, 2 Tears on the Window, released in November 2018. Now based in Abbotsford, British Columbia, Canada, Kevin and Julia continue to share their story of hope and work in restricted access nations, assisting with community development, social enterprise, mentoring, and spiritual formation. They have 4 children and 3 grandchildren. Our second guest is Blair Christing. After studying physics and mathematics at University of Toronto, Blair eventually worked in health sciences, where he became a chiropractor with further studies in athletic injury management, clinical nutrition, and applied kinesiology. Blair consolidated his skills and moved to Zimbabwe to serve the people there. For more than 40 years, he worked in 6 countries on 4 continents. During his career abroad, he worked closely with other health providers as standalone practitioner in health clinics and a children's orthopedic hospital. Returning to Canada in 2018, he now owns and operates his chiropractic practice at Upper Oakville Chiropractic Center. He continues to do advanced studies on brain function, affect and mood disorders, balance disorders, and gait difficulties. Other conditions he handles are concussions, MS, and Parkinson's disease. Well, welcome, you 2 gentlemen. And as I mentioned before, in full disclosure, if you haven't put the 2 things together, Blair is my older brother. I'd like to twist the knife a bit about that. And one of my life's mentors. So I have a significant bias towards him. And so I just thought I'd put that right out there, but that doesn't mean I can't take a shot at him either. And we'll enjoy that because I know he can handle it and hand it right back. But thank you, Kevin and Blair. Today we want to look at high stress and big trauma. And I'm going to start by asking Blair, can you briefly share with Kevin and myself the story of the events of trying to give some pastoral counsel to a lady while you were living in Harare, Zimbabwe, under Mugabe's government?
I was practicing my chiropractic practice, and started in 1984. I had established in 1985, I had helped establish a Christian counseling center in Harare itself. It was during the latter part of one day on Thursday, December 9th, 1993, that a lady came to my office, my chiropractic office, and was asking to see me for counseling. This was very irregular. I normally only spent one day afternoon a week in the counseling center. So to me, it was not an official counseling session. It was something that it was just a preliminary inquiry. What started off, my secretary was dismissed, and as it was the end of the day, and what was supposed to be about 10-minute chat about how we could proceed or if we could proceed in counseling, it became about a 20-minute conversation. And during that time, she was particularly agitated, and she was wringing her hands, literally wringing her hands, and there was terror in her eyes. After about 20 minutes in conversation, which started off with a ruse about her husband wanting the sixth child after 5 and her not agreeing to it, I realized it was a large conflict between her and her husband. And at that time, he burst into the office where I was. He pointed his finger at myself and at her and said, "You're seeing my wife. You're in trouble." Well, and she is trouble. At that point, he picked her up. He threw her against the wall heavily. Now, this man was 6'4" and about 285 pounds. He was the national heavyweight wrestling champion, known as the Black Panther. And at that point, he dragged her out of the office, and she had told me earlier that she had a appointment with her GP the following Monday. So it was at that point that I realized that we were connected in the same building, and it was something that was, I knew Dr. John very, very well. That night I went home, and because she wasn't an official client, she was not a patient of mine, she was not an official client of mine in the counseling center. So I wasn't breaking confidence when I told my then wife, that of what had happened. And we were noticeably concerned, not so much for ourselves, but for the wife, because she was very, very much terrorized by him. The conversation then went. I called the following day. I called the GP and said, "I understand that Mrs. Tengendi has an appointment with you." And he said, "Yes, on Monday." And I told him about what had happened, and he said, "Yes, unfortunately, I've had to attend to her several times because of wife battery." The following Wednesday, we read in small classified ad about her demise. And at that point, we realized that there was a very, very likely foul play, and then we had a professional obligation to bring this matter to the police authorities. By the following day, I had notified this other medical doctor, and by the following week, now this was just the week before Christmas, we had decided to go to the CID police, the Central Criminal Investigation Division. So we made a report. And at that point, they said, write a statement, etc., which we did. and we submitted it. And then the ball was rolling. At that time, within about 9 days, we got some, life continued on. I went to work, kids went to school, etc. But the moment we started to make the statement, then the criminal investigation, the police contacted us and said, please be careful, make certain that you take alternate routes away from home, back home, school. Don't route the same way to your, for your children, taking them to school back. And so we realized that they were taking some specific precautions, and they knew the individual that was mentioned in our report. Within a week, we started hearing from different people about this guy's notoriety. He was definitely a sociopath. He was known to actually pick up hitchhikers, beat them up, leave them half dead at the side of the road. One lady that was in the church that we attended, Mrs. G, I'll call her, and who called us and said that he was a very dangerous individual. And I asked her how she knew, and she said, well, he used to be my boyfriend / lover before I became a Christian. And when he held a gun to my head one day, she said, I'm out of here. And she did. And he was like many aggressive people, only listened to people who were more aggressive. And her brother came along to him with an AK-47, who was from the Army. And he said, if you touch my sister or you're going to get anywhere close, you're not going to have a head. So at that, with those kinds of things, our concern again became more heightened for ourselves. And I wouldn't say it was worry. I didn't have a lot of time on my hands. I had extremely busy practice. We were involved with missions. I had a social life. I was involved in a counseling center. And those ate up the minutes of the day. And though this was very conscious of this in the background, it wasn't something that I had the opportunity to actually dwell upon, unlike yourself, Kevin, probably, who had all day.
Yeah.
So we certainly got on our knees. We prayed. We read God's word more earnestly. And I would say that in all likelihood, living in Zimbabwe in the years from 1984 to 1993, those 9 years prepared us to actually deal with more high-stress situations, because the economy and this post-independence flux societally were something which was constantly in flux. And it helped us to, shall I say, be perhaps a little bit more prepared for an event like this.
In the end, this gentleman actually threatened you in court and said that you were a dead man in your family, and had the courage to do that in court or in front of you? Or?
No, he didn't threaten me verbally, but he did say he came in court. We went to a magistrate's court because that followed up with the statements that we had prepared. And he took up a rolled piece of paper, and he was towering over me, and he shoved the paper in my face. And he said, today we'll hear about how you and my wife are having an affair. And I just looked at it. I actually was seated, and I stood up and I said, yes, today we'll hear the truth. And at that, he literally fell back. That was it. But subsequently, one that was very, very instrumental was the High Commissioner of Canada, Charles Bassett, who came along and just mentioned to the police that we have a Canadian who's involved in a certain incident. It's involved with a criminal investigation. And that, I believe, helped to put the brakes on this Mr. Tengendi so that he left me alone. The other British medical doctor who was former army officer, he threatened him and his kids, but we heard no more from him. Thanks,
Blair. So, Kevin, in your story, incredibly gripping, you described as spending up to 6 hours a day in interrogation and isolation. What was that like for you?
Well, to put it mildly, not very much fun. And when we say up to 6 hours a day, we say that because that's the legal limit. Did they stick to that? No. There was lots of times where we did the 6 hours, and we had homework, and so I'm on my own during this whole time, but it was very intimidating because I had three basically public security officers facing me. I was sitting in a chair and they were at a desk across from me and threatening me many times. They came across the main investigator, Mr. Wong, we'll call him. He was kind of like Jekyll and Hyde. One day he was nice, next moment he wasn't so nice at all, and threatened me with many years in prison, threatened me with execution, and and saying I'm a spy. And I'm thinking, how could they ever think that? Like, if they've been watching, they know I'm not. So it was very frustrating, but very intimidating as well.
And how can you describe to me, like you used it wasn't fun, and that sounds like a little bit of a deflection of really difficult emotions. How intense were you? Were you terrified?
I was terrified at times. Yeah, absolutely, because I had no recourse. I couldn't go out for a break. I was locked in this room, in this building. I had my meals in this room. The only time I got out of the room was to go to the washroom, which was just down the hall. There were probably 50 to 60 security people in this compound just for myself and my wife. So that's very intimidating. I never saw a gun. I know they were around, though. Everything was very, very secured. I couldn't call anyone. I couldn't talk to anyone. And all I'm hearing is what they're saying. And, after all, you start to think, well, like, was I a spy? Because this was on for day after day, hour after hour, and week after week, really. And you have no one to fall back on. I did see the representative from the Canadian Embassy every couple of weeks, but I could never talk about what was going on. They could only ask, are they feeding you? Are they beating you? Things like that. The other thing that's going on is, sorry, go ahead. Mm-hmm. I was just going to say, the other thing is that they're doing is the lights are on 24/7. I couldn't have anything of my own. If I wanted to drink water, I had to ask for a bottle of water. If I wanted to go to the bathroom, I had to ask to go to the bathroom, and then a guard would accompany me there. So it's very kind of humiliating and intimidating, the whole thing that's going on. And when they threaten execution, that happens in China. So it's not an idle threat either. So
right.
You're a little scared.
Mm. And did you ever find that you were starting to question yourself? You kind of alluded to that you started to question your own thinking?
I started to question my own thinking. And I knew I wasn't a spy, because we're not spies. We went there as Christians. We went there to be a witness in that place. And, I told them that again and again and again. Probably every day I told them, we're only here because we're hoping to see people come to know Jesus. I told them that multiple times. And they're saying you're a spy. You're saying you met all people, you use your coffee house as a base of operations to disseminate, and gather spy information. And I'm thinking, no, we came to serve good coffee and good food and to be a witness to people here, right? So it became incredibly frustrating. And you start to question yourself, did I do something wrong? You're questioning, were people using me to get information and I didn't know it? There's all of these kinds of things are going on through your mind. Again, because you have no one to talk to except yourself. Talking to yourself isn't always helpful.
I understand. So, guys, if most psychologists were listening to your stories, they would probably predict a diagnosis of a big T trauma for both of your experiences, which big T trauma, as you would probably already know, means that there's unwanted, distressed memories. You relive the traumatic event. There's nightmares. There's possibly physical reactions, even avoidance symptoms of avoidance. Try to not think about what you're experiencing, possibly certainly feelings of hopelessness and memory problems, but always on guard and trouble sleeping, trouble concentrating. And so can I ask you two gentlemen, Blair's already kind of talked a bit about that, alluded to it, but do you feel like you were traumatized?
Do you want me to go? So go ahead, Blair. Do you want me to go? So go ahead, Blair.
Go ahead. Yeah. No, okay. I don't feel that. I mean, I was in subject to a situation that had high drama, but it was short bursts of things. Certainly, we had, when it comes to traumatized, I would say, were there some sleepless nights? Yes. Well, there's some significant, and with the lights out. Was there times, I would say that perhaps 6 to 9 nights like that? Were there times when we spent significant more time in prayer? Yes, that very definitely, and consulting God's Word again. Was there time when we actually tried to, we had an opportunity, unlike Kevin, we had the opportunity to speak to others. So other church members in the church, that Upper Room Ministries that we were involved with, as well as eventually with like the High Commissioner and some of other personnel. Was there memory lapses? No, I would not say so. Was there avoidance? No, I don't think so. It was something that was straightforward. We had the volition and the opportunity and the assistance of the Criminal Investigation Division. So they were, in some sense, acting as a shield for us. It was the gentleman that was the perpetrator of further crimes a year later that we perhaps will get to. He was a loose cannon. He was completely unpredictable, and in that sense, he wasn't systematized and wasn't being controlled by a system where there were checks and balances. So in that sense, there was a lot of wariness as to what could happen and uncertainty. Very definitely with that. On the other hand, he was expendable. I mean, if the police or the army wanted to take care of him, they could have. And so it was the unpredictability that was worrisome. And certainly the conversation, once our 4 children were in bed, and the conversation between my former wife and myself would get around to sort of, have we done the right thing? Or should we have, we've second guessed ourselves that way. From a ethical point of view, professional ethical point of view, I couldn't see anything else other than what we had done that was the correct course of action.
And I hear you. So I appreciate that. And so you have always been, Blair, a very strong-minded man. And so whenever you put your mind to it, in contrast to me, and you and I have joked about this, and you've challenged my thinking about this, that for anybody that does a super marathon around the mountains of South Africa, you better have a strong mind to keep going. And I'm more of a sprinter. And but I know you challenged me in saying you just got to do one more step at a time. But I will we'll circle back to talk about that. But thanks for that. Kevin, what about you? Do you think and feel like you experienced trauma?
I didn't think about it at the time, but certainly afterwards I did. And, when we got back, people set us up with meeting some counselors and psychologists and things like that. And, I didn't know I needed it, but we did. But the thing that struck me most was just a couple of statements that they made. And one was, don't make any major decisions for the next 18 to 24 months. And I don't know why, but I thought, that sounds right. I don't know why. It just sounds right. The other thing one psychologist talked to us about, he was actually worked for the U.S. Army. But he said, as long as you're not getting stuck, don't worry about it. Just keep going. And he also said, tell your story. Share it. Share what's going on. And that was very helpful. So, writing the book that we did was very helpful. It was very hard for me to read that book afterwards. And I didn't really read it until we actually did the audio version because I didn't want to think about some of those things. And sometimes I still don't. But it was very traumatizing. And I'll tell you something else that struck me. I thought I was doing everything normal, and I realized after about 18 months, it would just kind of suddenly, there was this, I don't know, enlightenment, I guess you could say. And as I said, I think I feel normal, but I didn't realize I wasn't feeling normal for 18 months. And so, and it's like, I had talked to people and I found one of the best things that really helped me was just meeting friends, having coffee, going for a walk in the park or whatever, meeting family. Those are the healing moments. And I didn't realize all that, but that's what I wanted to do. And that's what I did. And that was those healing moments came in pieces over those months.
Well, that's an interesting. Both Blair and I could recall and listening to our grandmother talking about our dad coming home from war, and he was the neighborhood boy that was friends with all my mom's older brothers, etc. So well known in the family. But when Grandma says he came back, he was not the same man, and nor would we ever hear him talk about it. So you're right, the reluctance to visit it or see it because it stirs up feelings and really difficult memories certainly is one of it. But when we do talk about the trauma, it is where the brain and the emotional capacity it no longer has the ability to process anymore, and the computer starts freezing and it's just spinning and spinning. But I really appreciate your insight that you more knew that when you were feeling normal than the other. That is really interesting. Can you? And also with regards to, I think there was probably nothing more helpful therapeutically than to say you need to tell your story and process it, because that's helping the brain and the emotions try to understand what's really not understandable.
Yeah.
Can I ask, did your families, both of you, did it affect your families at all? Because we can talk about vicarious trauma. We see that also in first responders, that most of them are tough-minded people that have climatized to facing very violent situations, but they end up coming home and the situations has affected the families. Did you find your wives or kids affected in any way?
Go ahead, Blair.
No, go ahead, Kevin. That's fine.
Okay. Well, yeah, absolutely. Because not only was I living in this intense pressure and, very tense situation for over 2 years, but my family was as well, because no one really knew what was going to happen. We learned afterwards, we believed I would be released, at some point, and I thought I would be too, but there was a huge doubt in that as well, in that belief. And so I noticed when I finally did come back to Canada after 775 days, wow, my parents had aged. My kids, didn't always want to talk about it, especially our youngest daughter didn't want to talk about it, hardly want to talk to us about it, because she felt so bad because she didn't go through anything, but she felt bad for us, and she twisted it around to how she, taking it a guilty part on her. Other kids, haven't talked always so much about it, but they handled it better. They were a bit older. So our youngest was 17 at the time. Our oldest was 28. So the two boys became basically the spokespersons for the family. My oldest son is in marketing, so that I guess that kind of led to that, being able to present to people and talk to people. And then our youngest he was actually in China, youngest son. He was 22, 23 at the time. And he became a calming influence on actually the Ministry of State Security, because he was fluent in Chinese, and they would actually sometimes go to him for translation because their translators weren't so good. But he would still say, yeah, it affected me too, because they're living under this kind of tension and pressure that is really difficult to deal with, right?
But I bet you, yeah, I mean, that'd be incredible. But in some sense, it might have been helpful for him because he had something to do, some way to help, to try to do.
Exactly,
Because I don't know about you guys, but I don't think there's a worse feeling for me than feeling powerless. I hate not having options. I hate just sitting there, and I think that's probably a good picture of trauma when we can't even see that there's a response that will help. Thing. But I can imagine how tough it was for your wife in that situation, because I mean, most partners want to reach out and do something to protect their partner, and she would have been so helpless.
And of course, she was detained. She was detained and had gone through the same thing. So
so she was detained for 6 months. And in what we call a black jail in China, means it doesn't exist. The government didn't know where we were. And then she was released on what they call bail pending trial. So free, but not free, right? She had no passport. She couldn't travel. People followed her. She had to report every week what she was doing, who she met. So it wasn't freedom. So she lived under, very similar kinds of pressures and tensions as well.
But at least a better insight as to what you experienced than with the children.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
For sure.
Well, what was amazing in the book, if I've got it right, please correct me if I'm wrong, but she was even being followed while in Canada when she had a sabbatical or whatever to go back. And so to think that China is following you in Canada, did I have it right?
You do. So she was allowed to come back to Canada for a brief period, and more of a test, don't talk to the media, things like that. And so she did that. And, but actually for about 1 to probably closer to 2 years, when we were both back in Canada, we had Chinese agents following us.
Wow.
So it didn't end when it ended. It kept going.
And how did that affect you?
Well, for me, I was thinking, well, they'll learn that we are who we say we are. I mean, so I took it that. I think Julia was more like, oh, they're following us again. It was very, more concerned than me. And I just thought, well, if they tap our devices, they see us going to church, good. That's okay. They'll see this. We are who we say we were. We did what we said we would do. So
may I ask, how could you be aware of the people that you were being followed?
At times it was incredibly obvious. I'll give you a couple of examples. One is the very first time we did a private thank you to a group of people. We'd arranged it with probably a couple hundred people came, and we did it at a church, not at church time. And 5 Chinese people showed up, uninvited. And we thought, well, that's pretty obvious. Okay. So my brother-in-law and his son had to kind of chase them off. This is a private event, not a public event. And so we just want to use the washroom. I said, no, you have to leave. So that was the first and very obvious one. Another one was when I was still in prison was my brother's computer. He lives in north of Toronto. And he said he was always having trouble with his computer. And he would sit there and watch the mouse move when he wasn't moving it. And finally he called Bell, his provider in a couple of times. And then he explained to them who I was. And they said, oh, well, China can do that from anywhere. So they can tap into things. So, and another time we actually had a meeting set up with the RCMP to talk about this. And it was very clandestine, I guess you could say. They were very careful how they arranged the meeting. And at the first meeting point where we had to go to another place, some Chinese people showed up as well. So
Kevin, do you feel like then that China can reach and get you anytime they want?
I think they probably can. I don't think we're, worth chasing. So, so I'm not. So I don't think we have to. I'm not worried about it. But I mean, it's common knowledge when we talk to people who were in government or things like that. They kind of say, "Welcome to our world. This is normal."
Wow. Was there ever a time that you felt you were outside of yourself, watching your own story when you were in prison? Like, how can this be happening? And you're going through all of this day after day after day, and you're kind of just sitting outside yourself watching?
I'm not sure quite about that. I do recall quite often, that moment before you wake up when you're not quite awake, and you're sort of semi-dreaming, and all of a sudden it hits you. Oh, I'm still here. This isn't a dream. There were certainly moments like that very often, and you try to get back to the dream, but you have to wake up and you're still in the same cell. So that wasn't. Well, again, it wasn't very much fun. It was just you realize, okay, I have to do this again. And, and the only way, of course, that I got through this was because of my relationship with Jesus. Yeah. And it was like every day I had to get up and say, God, we have to do this again. Meaning you have to help me. I cannot do this on my own. Yeah. And there are many times where I was in despair, really, at the end of everything I could think of to do. And I would say, God, you've got to help me. I can't do this anymore. And time again, on a daily, if not moment by moment basis, he came through, and there was grace to go on.
Well, and so that's an important piece. One of the things we see happening, as we probably all know, is that at least in North American Western society, religion is not exactly the favorite topic, and we have lost favor. But spirituality definitely is on the rise, and even seen as absolutely critical for good wellness, psychological health, and just strictly life. And so, run with me here, guys. In my understanding, certainly in psychological worlds and in the counseling world, Eastern religions and some of the skill sets and the abilities of certain Eastern religions like Buddhism and meditation has found to be very helpful. And in my limited understanding of it, it is often the Eastern religions are trying to help us to let go of attachments that bring us security, whether it's things, whether it's this world, whether it's family and other relationships. While the Western religion or Christianity, we focus on letting go personally in order to attach. So Eastern is letting go of attachments, but Christianity is more specifically saying letting go of attachments in order to attach to a loving God who actually, which I find interesting, I don't know if I've ever thought of this since preparing for today, guys, the loving God who experienced big T trauma for you and me. And so how do you think that helped you, this attachment to a loving God through these times that you were so despairing and despondent? How was that experience for you?
For me, absolutely essential. I don't know how people get through things without God. I just don't know. You do come out, I suppose, as we've seen, not so long ago with the two Michaels who were released from China again. But I don't know how you come out undamaged or the least damaged without Jesus. I just don't know how it's done.
And so that was a way that buoyed you up and helped you get through another day.
Absolutely, every single day. I mean, a day, an hour didn't go by when I didn't ask for help, and and so many times, so many things that happened that could only be God. One quick example. So after a while, when I was in the big prison, Julie is allowed to send me books and send me these little cards that she would write. On the front, she would write a verse. On the back, she would just write a bit of news. And so I would see the embassy once a month for 30 minutes, and they would be able to pass these things on to me. So I would save them, and I would only read one a day. On the 31st, I read the number 31 and whatever it was, right? So, and this is just one example of many. One day I was, I got up very early in the morning, as I always did. The lights are on, so that didn't matter to other people. There's 14 in my cell. You have to remember that too. And 14 people in my cell. So I would have my devotions. I would read and pray quietly, of course. And when it came time to read these cards, because I had routines, which were hugely helpful to me, I read this card, and I had been reading in Psalms, and that day this was from the Psalms, and it's just not on top of my head. I think Psalm 86, and it talks about when you go through the valley of Baca, which means the valley of weeping, and on that card was the exact same verse. And I thought, God, how do you arrange that? Like that morning, early in the morning, I was reading through that Psalm, and a little bit later in the morning, on this card, which I had probably received 2 weeks before and hadn't looked at, was that same verse. And time again, that happened to me in many different ways.
Wow. Well, there's something about the ability to ask somebody for help.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I had a helpline. It just was different than we expect sometimes. But the response back and your awareness of that was that you weren't alone, and I think that's an interesting dynamic when we talk about spirituality. So let me ask this blatant question to both of you: you think your spirituality is a vaccination against trauma? A vaccination against trauma? No, it's not a vaccination against trauma. It's a vaccination to get you through trauma. And I think there's quite a big difference. And if we look at Isaiah 43, it talks about when you go through the fires, when you go through the rivers, they'll not overcome you, you'll not be burned. Doesn't mean you go through them, but you're not irreparably harmed. That's the way I see it. And that's the way I feel.
Interesting. Blair?
From a, shall I say, medical health point of view, vaccinations do not fully prevent you from getting disease. It lessens the severity, and it lessens the opportunity for your own immune system it improves your immune system to actually get through the exposure of the disease. So I quite agree with what you've said, Kevin. I think that in 1988, when our sister died, I spent a long time in the book of Job. I read through it 4 times and basically came to the conclusion at the end of it of someone who had become detached. He lost everything. And this historical event that is described, basically, Job comes to the conclusion, in my mind at least, Job comes to the conclusions, I really don't understand all that you're doing, but I know who you are. And knowing who you are, knowing that he is your savior, your friend, your protector, there's nothing that is bigger than him, and he can take care of you in whatever way. However way it all sort of pans out, his heart is big enough to encompass all of those, any of the considerations.
And yet,
I totally agree.
Well, and yet, Job is suffering, and yet he thinks that he his God is loving him. He's taking everything away from him. And so how does that fit, Blair, in your thinking? Most people would blame God for that.
Yeah, I'm sure. And those are the ones that perhaps are more attached to whatever they're attached to. Job found his attachment greater to God than to any other consideration. Whether or not it was a human, his own wife asked him, said, please just curse God and die. And he said, I won't do it. So even his closest of relationships were superseded by his understanding of who God was and how he was in close proximity and to him.
Well, which is, I think, the amazing part of both of your stories, and is that it's the relationship that was the anchor. And the relationship is there's a knowing of a person. And so understanding that experience, and unfortunately, there's lots of people that don't get it. They've experienced religion, they've experienced rituals, they've experienced different things, and so it's a difficult thing to describe that or help people understand. But we do understand in other religions, though, that they do have some kind of experience, and it's the experience. I've often said, religion or faith without an experience, I have no interest or interest in it at all. It better have something that I can experience it internally if it's going to be in my life at all. Let me ask a difficult question. Certainly it's a difficult question for me, but let me ask you this, guys, and I appreciate your ability to be open. I really have. With trauma, we understand with PTSD that often there's a dual diagnosis, and the dual diagnosis is often with some kind of coping or maladaptive coping mechanisms like addictions and drugs and alcohol and those kind of things. Have you ever considered that perhaps your faith has been a religious addiction that has been coexisting with your trauma?
In a simple response, no. My faith was there before the experience, and it was only deepened because of it.
I think that's a good description.
Interesting, and yet there is characteristics that are similar, and I like to point out that that two people can go through the same experience and one be traumatized and one not be. And it doesn't mean anything or say anything about them. It's just that it has that effect. But it's interesting also, there's characteristics even about maladaptive behaviors that we can find similarities in things that are very helpful. Like, as you said, Kevin, I used to have routine and ritual. And Blair said it as well. I was very busy. I had a busy practice. I had routines, so the brain loves that. The mind loves that. It helps stabilize this, and yet it can be a bad coping mechanism if we use other things to try to help it. I found that interesting. So in part of religion, I think, generally speaking, is the rituals and the routines are very helpful often.
Yeah. I found after prison, there were some routines I wanted to keep up. I didn't want my food served through, into a plastic bowl through the door. I didn't want that anymore. But the routines that I wanted to keep was getting up early every morning. In my case now, I could have coffee. Then I couldn't have coffee. And reading and praying for a while. I mean, that's the routine I want to keep. And I feel, somewhat empty if I don't. Not empty is not the word, but I feel like, I want to do that. I need to do that.
As a chiropractor, I deal with structure, physical structure, muscles, bones, nerves, etc., the communication systems, as well as the biochemistry. But all things have structure. And without the structure, you're an amoeba. You just kind of flow wherever. So structure is important, and structure is required for you to have any kind of impact or work.
Yeah, for sure.
And forward movement, purposeful movement.
Yes, absolutely.
Right. Can I ask you also, how has this affected you in positive ways, this trauma or these stressful experiences?
If I may answer that, I didn't go through the daily grind what Kevin did, and I just thinking in my mind as you're speaking, Kevin, what kind of things I would have experienced. I was never followed by people years later, etc. What happened was as I mentioned, it was just before Christmas in 1993 that this incident took place. He did murder there's no doubt in my mind that he murdered his wife at the time that came to me seeking help. He poured organophosphates, basically fertilizer, and she burned from the inside out after beating her up mercilessly. It was common in Zimbabwe to have, after 1 year, to have a memorial of some kind. And I saw just prior to Christmas a full-page memorial saying how he missed his wife, et cetera, et cetera. And I said, this is a guy that's just guilt-ridden. On Christmas and rituals, and maybe we're supposed to expect a sort of happy time and a close relational time, can be stressful if it's not that way. And Christmas night the following year, 1994, Mr. Tengendi, he wrote down exactly what he was about to do. He had a new girlfriend. He was going to murder her, kill her, and all her family. He gave specific instructions as to what to do with his wealth, and he had been very wealthy. And I say had been, he had bought the police off in my suspicion that he encouraged people to be quiet about what happened, whether it was in the judicial system or in the police, and other people, the coroner, et cetera, et cetera. And and they just kept asking for more. And eventually he became, instead of being powerful in terms of not only physical size, a bigger than life personality, he was powerful in his money, he became powerless. And at that point, he literally killed his girlfriend, her sister, shot 3 other people that ended up in critical care. The children of that family hid under beds and escaped injury. One guy tried to flee. He was shot in the back. Of those 3, 2 died. And then he drove to a church and told the minister that what he had done. He just said he had done something very bad. And when he asked the minister to go to his car to get his Bible, he shot himself in the church. So that was the end of the story that way. But there was a fellow who had some sense of religious, and I say religious
Moorings?
background. I didn't say mooring. I don't think so. He was adrift. But he had some kind of reference, religious reference. But it did him no good whatsoever if it's not stronger than just a reference. If it's not relational and strong and personal. Kevin, you speak about reading scripture. And the way I look at that is that when I read my Bible, I think of that this is Jesus in written form.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
In written form.
Yeah.
These are his thoughts in his heart, his mind, in written form. If you read it as just as a book of some interest or some academic pursuit, you're not going to have the same kind of anchoring that goes in the midst of a high stress, high trauma, capital T event.
Well, guys,
very true.
Our time is gone, and I am so grateful for you to share from your hearts and from your life experiences. Kevin, you have your book, and I want to be able to recommend it. Two Tears on a Window. That it is a great read, and I think you'll enjoy. That's it there. Yeah, thanks, Kevin. And they can get it. Is it a website, Two Tears on a Window?
Yeah, twotiersonthewindow.com or Amazon, Kindle, Kobo, all those places you can find it as well. Yeah.
Great true story of a gripping story of actually what happened, especially in light of the various other Canadians that are going through this and other people. Certainly, if you want a good chiropractor, he's in Oakville. But guys, more specifically, the gift that you've given us is the gift of your vulnerability and willing to share from who you are. And I really am grateful for you taking the time to share with this. So thank you so much.
Good, you're welcome.
Very, very glad to be able to share. Thank you.
Yes, me too. Thank you.
Okay, excellent, guys.